All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we're trying to understand why Wealthify, it's a pretty big investment platform, why they've chosen to completely avoid it.
Yeah, I've seen some discussion about that.
Yeah, and they have this article where they outline their reasoning and kind of brings up this question, is Bitcoin like this golden opportunity, or is it just a big gamble?
It's interesting how this debate keeps popping up.
Yeah.
Wealthify's article, they even point out that all this Bitcoin hype right now, it really mirrors what happened back in 2017, 2018.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of frenzy around Bitcoin.
Not at all. And they highlight those, those dramatic price swings, the things that make Bitcoin so, I guess, captivating, but also really scary.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the numbers, it's pretty wild. Like in October of 2020, Bitcoin was valued at about $10,800.
Yeah.
But then just a couple of months later, by December of that same year, it had shot up to almost $29,250.
Wow, that's a huge jump.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of volatility, I think it would make anyone a little bit nervous.
Absolutely. And that boom and bust cycle is exactly what worries, seasoned investors.
Yeah.
It just reinforces that perception that Bitcoin is inherently risky.
Okay, so we've got these crazy price swings, but what actually makes Bitcoin valuable in the first place?
Right.
Is there something tangible backing it up, like you have with stocks or bonds?
That's a really good question, and it's the main thing Wealthify is grappling with.
Yeah.
They argue that unlike traditional investments, Bitcoin just doesn't have that intrinsic value.
Interesting.
Stocks, represent ownership in a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bonds, they represent debt.
Right.
But Bitcoin, it's basically just code.
So if it's just code, couldn't someone just come along and create Bitcoin 2.0
Yeah.
and make it even better?
It's definitely possible. And that actually gets right to the heart of the debate surrounding Bitcoin's value. Some argue that Bitcoin's value comes from its limited supply and that decentralized structure. They see it as like a digital form of gold.
Oh, interesting.
But Wealthify actually cites research from the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and that research argues that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value.
Okay.
But here's the interesting thing. They also point out that our everyday currencies, like the US dollar, they also lack intrinsic value in the traditional sense.
Wait, so you're saying the US dollar is just as made up as Bitcoin?
It's an interesting parallel. It makes you wonder, what really gives any currency value? Is it backing by gold? Is it a government mandate? Or is it simply our collective belief in its worth?
Huh.
Maybe it's a combination of all those things.
So there's this whole debate about value, but Wealthify also draws a very clear line between speculation and actual investment.
Right.
And they put Bitcoin squarely in the speculation camp. Why is that?
Well, think about it this way. An investment, typically, that's when you put money into something hoping for long-term growth. And that's based on fundamentals. So you'd invest in a company because you believe in their future earnings potential.
Right. Makes sense.
But with speculation, it's more about trying to profit from short-term price movements.
Oh, right.
And that's often driven by market hype or sentiment, not those underlying fundamentals.
So is Wealthify essentially saying that Bitcoin is basically just gambling?
That's the impression they're giving. They emphasize that Bitcoin's price, it's just incredibly volatile.
Yeah.
And it fluctuates way more dramatically than, say, global shares. To put it into perspective, Bitcoin is over 4 times more volatile.
Wow.
Yeah. That roller coaster, it might be thrilling for some, but it doesn't exactly scream safe and stable long-term growth.
Okay, so wild volatility, definitely a red flag for Wealthify.
Yeah.
But they also have serious concerns about the regulations surrounding Bitcoin.
Right.
And the security.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
The legal landscape for Bitcoin, it's still very much in flux. We've seen bans on Bitcoin mining in certain places. And a lot of banks are still hesitant to deal with cryptocurrency exchanges. And then there's this whole other question looming: central bank digital currencies.
Oh, right.
CBDCs.
Yeah, I've heard about those.
Institutions like the European Central Bank, the US Federal Reserve, they're all looking into creating their own digital currencies.
Right.
And this could potentially disrupt the entire cryptocurrency market.
So are governments essentially trying to make their own versions of Bitcoin?
Potentially.
But wouldn't that undermine the whole point of Bitcoin being decentralized?
Yeah, it's a complicated issue.
Yeah. Okay.
There are strong arguments on both sides. Proponents of CBDCs, they argue that these could be more stable.
Right.
And they could offer better security compared to decentralized cryptocurrencies. But critics, they worry that CBDCs could give governments too much control over people's finances.
It sounds like a bit of Wild West out there in the digital currency world.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Wealthify also brings up those, like, scary Bitcoin heists. I remember reading about that huge hack where millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin just disappeared.
They specifically mention the 2014 Mt. Gox hack. 850,000 Bitcoins were stolen. It was massive.
Wow.
And that's not even the only one. We've had other high-profile hacks since then, like the Upbit exchange hack in South Korea.
Oh, right.
These events, they just highlight how risky this decentralized system can be. Unlike with traditional investments, there often isn't a central authority to turn to if your Bitcoin gets stolen.
Yeah.
So,
So with all these risks, it seems like Wealthify is just being super cautious about Bitcoin.
yeah.
Are they just being old-fashioned, or is there more to their reasoning?
Well, Wealthify's pretty upfront about their investment philosophy. They prioritize long-term sustainable growth.
Okay.
They want to build portfolios that can handle market ups and downs and generate consistent returns over time. And they just don't think Bitcoin's volatility fits into that vision.
So Bitcoin's a little too wild for them?
Pretty much.
But could they be missing out on a huge opportunity?
It's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. We'll explore that more after a quick break. Stay tuned. It is pretty fascinating to think that Wealthify might be, like, missing out on something big by avoiding Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a good point. Remember, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they represent like a whole new way of thinking about money and value.
And I think that's what makes this whole topic so interesting. We're not just talking about investment strategies here. We're talking about, like, a potential paradigm shift in finance as we know it.
Exactly. So while Wealthify's focusing on those traditional ways of investing, there's this whole other world emerging. It's like an ecosystem of crypto-focused investment platforms and funds and things like that.
Wow.
And these platforms, they're really catering to those investors who believe in the long-term potential of cryptocurrencies. You know, the ones who are comfortable with those risks we talked about.
So it's almost like two completely different universes of investing.
You could say that. And it's important to remember that Wealthify's opinion on Bitcoin, it's not necessarily the absolute truth.
Right.
There are plenty of credible people in the financial world who see Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as like a legitimate asset class. They really believe in the potential.
Okay, so it's not a clear-cut issue. There's room for debate. Let's go back to those concerns about regulation for a second.
Sure.
Wealthify really emphasizes how much the regulatory landscape is changing. What does that mean for, like, the average person who might be thinking about getting into crypto?
It means that doing your research is absolutely crucial. Before you invest in any cryptocurrency, you need to understand the specific regulations in your area.
Yep.
Are there restrictions on buying, selling, holding cryptocurrencies? How are crypto gains taxed? These are the kinds of questions you really need to answer before you make any decisions.
So it's kind of like that Wild West analogy we used before.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just head into uncharted territory without a map.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, the rules around cryptocurrencies, they're still being written. What's legal today might not be legal tomorrow, so staying informed is super important.
Okay, so we've got this tension between the potential of crypto and all the uncertainty surrounding it. Wealthify also brought up this thing called the network effect.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Imagine, like, the very first telephones. If you were the only person with a phone, it wouldn't be very useful, right?
No, not at all.
But the more people that get telephones, the more valuable that network becomes. Everyone benefits.
That makes sense.
And it's the same with Bitcoin. The more people who use it, the higher its perceived value becomes.
So the more people using Bitcoin, the more valuable it becomes.
Yeah.
But then Wealthify throws in this idea that, like, Bitcoin could get replaced by a better cryptocurrency.
Right. That's the other side of the network effect. Bitcoin might have been first, but there's no guarantee that it's going to stay on top forever.
Right.
There are always new cryptocurrencies being developed. Some of them might even be more advanced.
So even if you're a big believer in the future of cryptocurrencies, it's not a sure thing that Bitcoin will be the one that wins out in the end.
Exactly. Think about, like, the early days of the internet. You had companies like Netscape and Yahoo. They seemed huge, untouchable. And then Google came along and changed everything.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same idea with cryptocurrencies.
It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving.
That's a great way to put it. And for investors, that just makes things even more complex and risky.
So after talking about volatility, regulation, and this network effect, let's go back to Wealthify's main argument. Why do they ultimately believe that Bitcoin just doesn't fit into their way of investing?
Their biggest concern seems to be the unpredictable nature of Bitcoin and really the whole crypto market.
Okay.
Wealthify's investment approach is all about diversification, long-term growth, and managing risk.
Right.
And they just don't see those wild price swings of Bitcoin working with that.
They're looking to build portfolios that can weather a storm, not get caught in a hurricane.
Exactly. They want steady, sustainable growth over time, not quick wins from risky trades.
But doesn't that mean they're ignoring the potential for big gains?
Yeah,
I mean, some people have made a lot of money investing in Bitcoin.
true. But you have to remember, for every success story, there are tons of people who have lost money in the crypto market.
That's true.
It's that classic high-risk, high-reward situation. You have to be okay with the possibility of losing everything.
And that's where Wealthify's philosophy comes in.
Right. They want to minimize those risks, protect their clients' money. They're not saying Bitcoin is bad or a scam. They're just saying that it doesn't fit their investment goals and their approach to risk.
So it really all comes down to personal preference and how much risk you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. There's no right or wrong answer here. Whether you see Bitcoin as a risky gamble or an amazing investment opportunity, it depends on your own financial goals, your risk tolerance, your investment philosophy.
That's a great takeaway. We've really explored the appeal of Bitcoin, the worries about its value and those price swings, and all the complexity surrounding regulations. But what does this mean for our listeners? So we've really unpacked Wealthify's perspective on Bitcoin. And, they're being pretty cautious, seeing it as a speculative thing that just doesn't fit with their long-term plans. But I'm curious, what about you? Where do you stand on Bitcoin after all this?
This whole discussion, it's been really thought-provoking because it goes way beyond just saying yes or no to Bitcoin. It kind of forces us to think about, what is money, really?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What actually gives something value? Is it, gold? Is it the government
Yeah.
saying so? Or is it, like you said earlier, that decentralized network and everyone trusting it?
Right. And then there's that question of control. How much do we want to rely on those big institutions versus going with these more decentralized systems? These are questions that, people have been debating for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But cryptocurrencies, they just throw a whole new wrench into the mix.
It's almost like crypto is holding up this mirror to our whole financial system.
Exactly. And even if, at the end of the day, you agree with Wealthify's cautious approach, you can't ignore the impact Bitcoin and all these other cryptocurrencies are having. They're changing how we think about value, disrupting industries, and we're seeing so much innovation happening.
So even if someone's not ready to invest in crypto themselves, it's definitely something to watch.
Oh, absolutely. The crypto story's still being written, and who knows what the ending will be.
Very true. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to hear from you, our listeners. Do you see Bitcoin as a risky gamble? Or could it be like a building block for the future of finance? Let us know what you think. This is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those questions coming.